Hello, everyone. I'm glad y'all able to join us this evening. Tonight, we're going to be talking about some interviews, and one of the interviews that we're going to be focusing on tonight will be Robert Ives. He spoke on and had numerous interviews over the course of the investigation, and since he left office, he's went on and had some interviews with other creators, and some of them quite lengthy. Some of them revealed certain information, and it's pretty consistent from one interview to the next of what he spoke about. And the thing to realize in communications and the difference between normally how we communicate daily in our lives and how you when an interview will make you more focused on a certain topic, such as with that when you go out and you and your family are talking about what's going on in a day is one thing, but if someone brings up a specific topic of how was your work day, then of course everything that is related to that one topic. And it's the same with interviews, and we're going to be focusing on exactly some of the things that I've said. Everything that's in this presentation is in that context. That I went through all these interviews, and I probably pulled out 50 or 60 different quotes that he spoke of, and the context that he was speaking of, and so that we can get a little bit of understanding of what he saw at the crime scene, what steps were taken in certain areas of the investigation, who was involved, and realize that during these interviews, sometimes people may say something, or their chain of thought will continue on, and a lot of information can be gathered sometime when that continuation of that thought process goes pushing the bounds of what the question was asked. And it's just certain things that we in law enforcement do, that when we interview people, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for knowing what, all interviews are goal in oriented, that when we do an interview, we're looking for certain information and we want certain details out. Some of these people conducting these interviews, of course, are not in the law enforcement arena, and they won't have the behavioral science units and everybody trying to figure out exactly what information you would want. But these interviews were very informative, and they most certainly something that Mr. Ives felt that he needed to do to bring some information into the public eye. And so with that, we'll start with our presentation.
Let's see if this Google machine will work for me today.
I hope it does.
All right, let's try this.
All right. As always, we're going to start off with a brief bio of me. I'm retired law enforcement, 20 years service. I worked everything from the jail, road patrols, investigations, and I was part of the SWAT team, from entry team leader to counter sniper. Took a lot of courses in different areas in my career. One area was most certainly getting certified as a crime scene tech, and then of course all the investigation courses that ran along with that. But I've worked all kinds of cases, from simple burglaries all the way up to homicides. I'm retired now, still in good standings, and keep my speaking with some of my old comrades, and still enjoy and have the fire to try to serve our community. But here is an individual that we're going to be speaking about tonight. This is Robert Ives. He was a prosecutor. He has 22 years total experience. So when this man speaks, he speaks in a very professional, well-defined. I mean, he's done thousands of interviews. He's been interviewed thousands of times. He's conducted prosecutions in front of juries. He knows how to ask questions. He knows how to answer questions. He was 18 years with Carroll County throughout his career. And he makes a statement that he went to the crime scene for context. And it's very interesting that he was there. We, here in Georgia, of all the homicides and everything that I worked, I never saw a DA, which we call them district attorneys here. Up there, they're prosecutors, and they may go by DAs there too. I haven't seen it. But they just wouldn't come to our crime scenes. Not that we would have stopped them, but some cases later on, the district attorney here in Georgia would send out their assigned district. They'll have investigators that work within the district attorney's office, and of course we collaborate with them and work our cases. But he makes the statement in here that they produce all the search warrants and all the subpoenas. And so even when we get into the case and we're talking about certain things, such as the search warrants and the subpoenas that were issued in this, he made the statement they produced all of those search warrants and subpoenas. Even with the FBI, that on the FBI search warrant, if we take him for his words, he is the one that worked with the FBI and produced that search warrant for them to go and present it to a judge. And getting a search warrant is a little bit different than a subpoena. A search warrant, you have to have probable cause, and that probable cause means that you have to have a set of facts that's 51% or more. That means it's more probable than not that something occurred. And within that, just when he was speaking of this, he was talking about some of the search warrants he got, and it was almost as if he was referring to the Ron Logan search warrant that they issued. He said that you may have certain facts, you may have certain red herrings. You find people that committed some crimes, but it's not related to this crime. And so I took that as possibly what he was, of all the crimes and all the subpoenas that he issued, regardless if it was for the Anthony shots or if it's for the Ron Logan or for the other search warrants that he issued, that there were certain people that committed crimes, but doesn't mean that they're related to this crime. And that sometimes it's just coincidental. And so I took it that face value. What does it mean? As we see, we'll go a little bit deeper in what his findings and what his comments and what his opinions are. And this is what my opinions of what his meanings are. You may watch the same videos I've watched, which you can go out there and look on YouTube. There's a lot of creators out there. Gray Hughes got at least two really good interviews that he produced. Most certainly check him out and look at that. And there were some other creators, and then there's some news interviews, whereas he just sat down with certain news agencies and did some interviews. But as they were interviewing him, he made some statements of what his duties were and where he was involved at as far as being in the chain of command and power of what he was required or asked to do. He said that, as a prosecutor, he's not in the chain of command and he can ask for certain things. And he felt that if he did ask for them, of course, they would work together and it'd be granted. And as I spoke earlier, he said that when he went on scene for context, he found that it was easier that if he knew the crime scene and had seen it himself, and that when he was speaking with other investigators or he was creating search warrants or if he was getting ready to prosecute an individual, he would have some firsthand knowledge. Very, very intelligent move. Can't blame the man. This is something that I wish it was done more often than not in my career. So he most certainly grasped the severity and the importance of this crime, and he took certain measures that I can't argue with. That's exactly what he should have done, and I'm proud that he did do that. And of course, once again, he mentioned that he produced all the search warrants. And later on, when we get to certain areas of his investigations, he's going to talk about the subpoenas. And he explains that you can get a subpoena, which is far easier to issue, and because it only has to be reasonably related to a criminal investigation. So as if you need to speak with someone, if you need certain records and you just want to issue a subpoena, not a search warrant, but a subpoena, that it just has to be related to a certain criminal investigation, and you can get it. And he talks about certain deaths and homicides that they investigated. And and this is pretty true. I mean, it's very basic of what he talks about homicides, and it's true in probably 90% of the time, maybe a little bit higher, that murders just don't happen unless, of course, you talk about some gang activities, motorcycle clubs, um, some of the mafia families and things about murders and power struggles. When you have disputes like that, of course, murders are consistent and they're generally easily identifiable. He made a statement that you only get killed by your friends and relatives. And, the FBI stats prove that a vast majority of the time you are killed by an associate that that you're known to them and you know them. And he further carried it that almost all the murders in Indiana that he looked at a lot of times was crimes of passion. And that's true also. But this was how he viewed what murders were. And so when he goes into, as we continue with the presentation, he's talking about different things and he's reflecting upon the crime. You're going to see that he's talking about something that has nothing to do with crimes of passion and things. And it's very revealing to me. And I put a lot of weight on that. But like I said, when you watch the videos and you look at it, I hope you look at it in a little bit different light and try to understand it. And most certainly let me know what your views on it are, for the fact that I'm open to anything that will progress this case. If there's things I missed in some of these interviews, most certainly the more eyes that can look at it, gather some information, and build a group mentality or a group conversation about something that it's good for the case. But he talks in one part of the interviews, he's talking about the Delphi, Indiana trails map. And as you can see on this, I didn't know the trail map was as long and went into the city, and you could basically walk it throughout the city, and it wandered out into the country. I originally thought that the trail map was just basically the Moon on High Bridge. And once I saw this, and I saw that people walked it in numerous different ways, and it was far longer than what I anticipated. But he made a statement that if you weren't from around here, you wouldn't know it existed. And which is a powerful statement when you think about that. If this is a place where someone's going to commit a crime, then they know where it's going to be at, and they have been there before. And we would have to look at some of the data and some of the crimes reported on that trail in the recent history of this crime. Was there some other issues about people committing certain crimes? Was it high drugs? Was there sexual offenses? Was there sexual acts being committed on this trail? I know in our community on some of the state trails and things, most certainly you have a lot of issues, and we'd go and answer certain reports, anything from attempted abduction to drug activity to sexual activities. But he says that the reason the girls went out there on this specific trail on this specific day was that, it's simply that it was a beautiful day. And his understanding of why they were there was that they wanted to go, and it was just a beautiful day for everyone to be out there. And he went on to speak about that the girls went out there and there was no logical reason. Now, this is his interpretation of that when he became aware and he's working the case and he's looking at the information on this case and he's reflecting back on this case. At the time of this interview, this interview timeline isn't that he's going from day one. He's looking at with all the information that he has at the time of these interviews, which is after he's gone from office and he's speaking to whoever's conducting the interview. And so he has in his mind all the information that he learned in totality about this case. And he speaks of that there's no logical reason for anyone to know the girls would be there that day. And so we have to look at some of the Anthony shots, what communications was there, how big was the catfish, and was there information saying that they were going to be there. This is kind of indicative that there that some of the information that is out there in the general public, how much rumor is it to it? But he most certainly doesn't reveal any information. And the next statement is he's not aware that anyone knew they were coming. And either he is protecting some very vital information, which, he most certainly, if he is, he's great at playing poker, because there was no indications of within the different interviews that he revealed that he didn't know. So I'm going to take his for words that he stated that he had absolutely no idea that anyone knew they were going to be there. And he says, lured there, he says, that seems unlikely to me. And so with that theme, that common theme in all these statements and in all these interviews, that he's looking at it more from the perspective. Doesn't mean that he's right, but he's looking from the perspective that he doesn't believe anyone knew they were there. He doesn't believe they were lured there. And he doesn't believe that anyone knew they were coming there. And as he says, he does not, I do not believe it was a planned crime, which means if it's not planned, then we're looking at random. And all these statements are from him. I'm not making these. I'm just telling you what these statements mean to me in my law enforcement perspective. And then he also jumped on it, and I don't know in the interview if there was something mentioned, but there was something in his mind that he says feels that during the investigation and during everything, and for the question asked, he says that he most certainly felt sorry for these little girls and their families, along with the 4 girls who were killed in the fires in Florida. And I'm sure that he anticipated that either he was going to be asked about Florida, or there was some part of the interview process prior that wasn't aired that I'm not have access to, but Florida was on his mind. And, that most certainly Florida would happen in the same time period, and him being an investigator and seeing all the stuff and being questioned over the years. And so he made a connection and he made a statement, and he included Florida in it. And so most certainly that brings up a lot of speculations by a lot of YouTubers. And do I know if that's rightly so or not? No, I don't. But I did find it interesting that he did mention them. He speaks also about the response of law enforcement that came there. He said it was incredible. He had anybody, everyone was sending agencies and officers from many different agencies. And everyone within those law enforcement agencies and within the group, they thought it was going to be solved just within a day or 2 or 3 days. And they never knew that it would carry on. And that was just a consensus of everyone working on it. It was going to be quickly solved. And but he also stated when talking about law enforcement that he would hope that they would consider releasing more information. And this is, like I said, this is after in some of the interviews that's several years later after he's gone from office that he's saying this, which is powerful. This man also who knew so much about the case, he knows there's information that can be released. He's a prosecuting attorney. If he says there's nothing further that could be released, means one thing. But when he says that he hopes they could and would consider releasing more information, then he has, as a prosecutor, he knows what can be released, and he knows if it would be harmful to the case. And with him making that statement, then that most certainly opens the door that we as people in the YouTube community, that we know now for a fact that there's something that he wouldn't feel that would threaten the case if law enforcement released it. And I'm sure he's commented with them or had meetings with them, and the prosecutor, whoever's in control now, I'm sure they've had those same discussions about what should we release and when should we release it, and if it'll harm the case or not. But regardless of who having those discussions today, this man here, Robert Ives, he most certainly thinks that there's information out there that can be released. And he also speaks in the interviews about that never in the whole time of the investigation while he was involved over those several months, and they were looking at leads and where were the leads leading to, that there was never a time that there was a person that they were totally focused on that they just didn't have enough. So he never had a established person of interest or a suspect. And he says at the beginning of the case, they had plenty of leads. But he said there was no great lead in all those plenty of leads. There was no great lead. And he says that, it got to the point that as going to that, they felt that it was going to be solved, but it's not because they really had a good lead. And so there was other evidence that was leading them to the conclusion that regardless of what leads they got, they had evidence that could lead to a suspect and lead to someone being focused on and investigated and eventually charged with a case. But that they had that much evidence, but it never led to that point. And he says leads didn't lead to anyone even closely chargeable. So even when you look at the Ron Logan, you look at the search warrants for him, you look at search warrants for Anthony Schatz, that the leads that were given didn't make them chargeable. And that from all the information gathered from the subpoenas, gathered from the search warrants, none of that ever led to anyone even closely chargeable. And like I say, these are his words. They're not mine. And so we have to look at how much value and how much weight we give his opinions. He talked about a part of the investigation that everyone is extremely interested in. He says we have cell phone, we have DNA evidence. He says that there was lots of subpoenas for cell phone records. And like I said, subpoenas for cell phone records are easier to obtain than search warrants. And so all he had to do is say that we have a crime and we need cell phone data. And so he issued some subpoenas. And he says, who could have been within 5 miles of that crime on that day? So from where the cell tower is, he's looking at, and not really, let me restate that, clarify that. He says within 5 miles of that crime on that day, not from where the cell tower is, but from where the crime is. So if I take that literally for what it means is that if you put Moon on High Bridge and the scene of the crime, and you did a circle 5 miles around it, that's what they subpoenaed. They wanted to know who was physically present in the area. And he stated that we're there for 3 hours. So there's something about that 3 hour period. Did they find someone that had been there for 3 hours? Were they looking at a specific 3 hour period? Most certainly, I believe Doug Carter talked about a vehicle being there for around 3 hours or so. And is this something just that's a Freudian slip, or is it something that they specifically put in there and they had a designated time frame 3 hours before or during, and what 3 hours was that? And he said that they were looking for people that had never been there before or since. So they ran programs. They would have filtered all the phone numbers, not only for who was there, but for people there that was only there that one time or had been there prior to, but have never returned. And so that's important. And that's a good investigative tool that when you, so they covered some bases on that everyone that pinged on that cell tower, they were within 5 miles of there. They had been there during that time period, never before or since. And that was just information and certain filters that you have to look at. And did their habits change? Because if there's certain people that were on a trail, on this walking trail on a daily basis or a weekly basis, you would be able to see those patterns. Now, he doesn't say how far back they went and searched these databases of the cell tower information. But if they were building a pattern of has never been there before or since, then that is indicative that it's more than just that day. That for you to build and make that statement that they've never been there before or never been there since, then that means that the subpoena was issued for a broad spectrum of time, so that they would be able to compare that information and be able to glean some type of information that would be good for the investigation and might possibly lead to a suspect. When he's talking about the sketches, and he's straightforward and very blunt, he said, I don't know the history behind the changes in the sketches. And he says, I don't know what that was all about. And so when he was asked about that, he just straightforward that he didn't understand it, don't know what it's about. And that's that. And so he most certainly was not ever spoken to or wasn't part of the discussion of that part of the investigation. I would have liked to have heard what his thoughts was on that, but he just shut down, and that's all that I've seen. Now, there may be other interviews out there where he speaks of that, but not that I've seen in the interviews and the several hours of interviews I've looked at. But when he's speaking of the crime scene, this is pretty critical here, and he covered it pretty well of what, when he went to that crime scene and he's looking at it, so he would have a understanding, could speak of it in the proper context. If he had questions with, if he's issuing search warrants, or if he's talking to other prosecutors or investigators, and they're talking about a certain topic or certain thing on the crime scene, that since he's been there, that he would have that firsthand information. And so when he talks about these are things that weren't relayed to him by a picture. These are things that weren't relayed to him by someone just coming to the office and describing. These are things that he saw. And he says he saw 3 or 4 characteristics that you would take pictures of. And that when he looked at that crime, he says it was unprecedented. It was robbery or random murder. And that was his first thinking of this crime. And he doesn't say anything else other than that. But when you watch the interviews, look at that context. If you have a different opinion of it, most certainly let me know. And he makes a statement that there was so much physical evidence at the crime, which is important. What was all the physical evidence that he saw? We don't know. We have some information of what they possibly may be looking for in the search warrants. And, but, he's talking about this crime scene and that it was found almost immediately after being committed and within 24 hours of their deaths. And so he felt most confident in that crime scene, and that he was glad that he was there and within that 24 hours. And he says there was a lot of traditional evidence, which was there. And he said some of it was somewhat odd, and there was unique facts. And which in all crime scenes, you're going to have that. But there were certain things that struck him as odd, that of all the crime scenes that he had seen, that it was odd. And so I put more basis upon what odd means, and I would love to hear what his definition of, and we will someday in some time, if this case ever goes to a court, regardless of who's prosecuting, we'll figure out what some of that odd stuff was. And he goes on in another interview, and he talks about it was physically strange. So he still has the same thought process, strange, odd. And he states that on the crime scenes, they had fingerprints, DNA, and footprints. Now, he doesn't say that this crime scene contained all of this. He's talking about in general, but when you look at that, he's being interviewed about a specific crime. And during specific crimes or during specific interviews, this is what it's not a Freudian slip, but it might be related along those lines, that he's thinking back to that crime and he's seeing what is on those evidence sheets. And he's looking at, and he looked at those collective information and collective data. And I take it that exactly what, in my opinion, is that there is fingerprints, there is DNA, and there is footprints. Footprints more than likely are close, of course, are going to be on those creek banks. Different areas of the crime scene could be in blood on certain surfaces, could be a bloody shoe print on even a piece of article of clothing. I've seen some really good footprints on clothing that if someone made contact in a certain angered situation that they may kick or not saying that this is what's happening in this case, but most certainly things can happen whenever bodies are being moved or you step here or there. You can step on certain objects that leave a very good footprint. And he makes a statement that he knows that there was DNA evidence that was not from the girls. He's talking about the girls, and when we're talking about the girls, of course, we're talking about human. And I took it that there is going to be human DNA. Now, there may be other types of evidence, trace evidence from dog hairs, because Libby was petting a dog earlier in the day. And so they may have had to do searches for different DNA. If there's dog hairs, they will collect it from Libby's dog. But there's always cross-contaminations and things that happen. He says that the method of murder has not been released. Didn't make any more comment on it. And he says it makes no sense where these murders occurred. And most certainly it doesn't. It's a beautiful day on a walking trail during the week at daylight hours. It's not the typical time that a murder will occur. And, you know, then he talks about that the evidence just wasn't there, which he's talking, I took it when he says the evidence just wasn't there, because earlier he says that there's plenty of evidence, but it's not the evidence that stands out against a certain individual. And when you look at it in that perspective, then you can have all the evidence in the world, but if it's not that person's DNA, it's not that person's fingerprints, it's not that specific profile or piece of evidence that would link that individual. So there's plenty of evidence there, and he saw plenty of evidence there, but it's not indicative and specific enough to charge anyone. And he says there's no apparent motive. And then he talks about this when he's speaking about some of the signature references. He says that there's at least three. He says, I'd say at least three. And so at least three means that minimum of three, and there could be more signatures, and he just doesn't know what relationship they have to this crime. And sadly, he makes one of the statements here that is most certainly critical, is that the crime scene is unquestionably contaminated, which a lot of crime scenes are contaminated. But in the manner he said that, and of course, I think there was some contamination even by the search team. And is that what he's referring to? More than likely. Is it possible that law enforcement contaminated it? Could be. I mean, most certainly, there's no way that you can go into a crime scene and not contaminate, because you bring your own environment. Even as I was when I went to crime scenes, you know, I try to do everything you can. You dress out, you try to limit and everything that you bring into it, but sometimes they get contaminated. He speaks about that of the evidence that they have, the video and audio of who I certainly believe killed the girls. In his mind, he says the video and audio, and of course that's going to be a bridge guy, and he says that this is the person that he believes killed the girls. Like I said, once again, this isn't my opinion. This is what this man said. And he, at one point, he tended to believe that it was a local person. But now that he reflects upon it later during this interview, and he thought initially it had to be someone local. He says now he doesn't know. So after all the months that he spent as part of this investigation and looking at this, that he thought it was local, but now he doesn't know. Is that due to that it's going cold and there's been an investigation and all these people have been ruled out? But he says he just doesn't know now. And then makes several statements here about a serial killer type of thing. And he says, I don't say this is a serial killer. This little disclaimer is that he believes, when you bring up a serial killer type of thing, and that I don't say this is a serial killer, he just isn't wanting to put out there that it is a serial killer. Does he believe it's a serial killer? I don't really know, but I'd give more probability that he does than he doesn't. And because you can have a serial killer living in your community and you never know about it. Does he suspect that? It's possible. Don't know. And he says it could be a random act by someone who isn't here all the time, which there's certain jobs, certain people, certain families that you may come into an area during certain times of the year and visit. And how is he relating that? Is it due to this person's job that they're just not there all the time? Is it due to family? Don't know, but that's just one of the things that he considered. But he does say that this person, that I call him a psychopath, he says it's a person with no conscience, a sociopath. And so, there's not a lot of difference. There's certain differences between the two, but not that much. And a person with no conscience most certainly is a danger to the community, and he recognizes this individual as that. And he said one of his greatest fears is that in 2 to 6 years from now, or as part of the deal, as they've seen in the past with serial killers, that someone will confess to this crime. And so once again, he mentions that serial killer. And that's a common theme that you'll see in almost all his interviews, that he does mention that. And so unlike Doug Carter or the FBI agents, that when they speak of it, they think it's going to be solved and everything. Robert Ives more goes along that it's going to be a random, it's possible going to be serial killer, or that's my feelings of how he feels about it. And he says he's no expert on serial killers. Once again, he mentions that serial killers. And so that's a common theme in our thought process in him. And he says that the FBI and other agencies were looking at crimes in other locations. Most certainly that would probably be the Evansdale, because there's so many similarities between the two, and other crimes across the country, because there's a lot of murders on walking trails, a lot of kidnappings, a lot of different type of offenders that frequent these and commit crimes. But then again, he makes a statement in an interview that I found extremely interesting. And this is talking about signatures. And when you talk about signatures at different crimes over different time periods, we're getting into that serial stuff. And he thinks that 1 or 2 of those things could pop up again. Yes. And so for that to happen, like I said, he's thinking more along that this guy is either killed before or killed again. What he saw was part of a signature. And this is from his understandings of what signatures are. It's not what I think, it's what he said, and in the context I took it in. So most certainly we have to look at it that, this man is one that's prosecuted people for many, many years for many, many things. And then he talks about the evidence at the crime scene and how it made him feel about circumstances of the crime and why it should have been solved and why it was odd. There was a lot of things that when you talk about circumstances of the crime that struck him and bothered him, and it still bothers him, because like I said, you can see in his interviews that the man took this case personal, and rightly so. I mean, who wouldn't, 2 young children, and that there's a lot more physical evidence than at that crime scene, which is, me and Mrs. Steve, we've talked about this a lot. What does that all mean? There's a lot more physical evidence at the crime scene. Is he considering the cell phone data? Is he considering the Anthony Shots accounts? I don't know, but there's also the possibility that there is other physical evidence that they found that wasn't at that crime scene, that was in different areas or something. Don't know. He also makes a reference to a semi-random crime. Don't know what that really means either. Semi-random, I mean, either it's planned or it's, I mean, is he talking about that you do have a serial offender that was there and that it would just happen to be these two young children that were targeted? Is that his definition of semi-random? I don't know. I most certainly would love if I ever get to talk to him, and I'm going to try to reach out to him, see if he'll speak to me from my law enforcement career, that maybe he'll clarify some of this, or he may not. I don't know, but I'm trying to make contact with him. And then a very disturbing statement that was in one of the interviews is that there's more to it than simply being killed. That's powerful. That means that this killer killed for a reason. Is that a fantasy, sexual driven, or is there a revenge? But that he most certainly thinks that there's something, and these children were killed more than just a simple killing, and which is extremely powerful and extremely meaningful to me. That'd be another question I would have for him. And then, of course, I would also ask him, which I know he would never tell me, but those one or two things that could pop up again. Yes. I most certainly think that that is something that he feels and that is critical to this investigation. And these are questions that are of these on this single slide that I found very perplexing. And but as we continue on, that if any of you look at this presentation and it strikes any type of recall or any type of tip that you could call in, most certainly let this information be known to Abby and Libby at this contact with the Carroll County. And because at the end of the day, we want to do one thing, and that's solve this crime. But anyway, now that we got through this, we got any questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Laundry list.
Excellent.
All right. Let's see here. So bear with me on this here Google machine. Here we go.
She's getting better at it.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to give her a raise.
Yeah. Let's see here. Anna Lizette, I agree with you. This will be good. Ives has said the most interesting things. I keep going back to and repeating his comments. I've done quite that too, just trying to figure out exactly what he was meaning, and I still don't know. All right, so let's see here. Bible group's making coffee again.
Excellent. I'm going to make some in just after this.
That's it. All right, so here we go. No, not quite there yet. My hickey got jammed up. Okay, Here we go. All right, so Sally brought up the comment that we've heard before. Rumor has it that they weren't allowed to speak to each other at the CS. How weird. So explain that.
And we've discussed about the crime scene investigators that were at the scene, processing evidence. And when the FBI is involved, or it's actually pretty good protocols to have procedures in, that if you're working on certain parts of it, that a witness is a witness. And if the FBI had certain protocols in place that we don't want you to influence another crime scene investigator on what you did that leads to certain information. It is weird that they did that because a lot of times, my crime scene team, we generally made up of about 5 of us. I was lead, and of course we had other individuals working certain parts of the crime scene and focusing on certain areas. Did I ever ask them not to talk to each other? No, but with this crime scene and over a large area, they may have been given certain duties. So yes, it's weird in some context, but I can see where it could be valuable that you are getting a pure understanding from an individual of what only they saw, not being influenced by any other crime scene tech.
All right. And Teresa? I think Ives gave us more than the police.
I do too. Absolutely. And he most certainly says that the police could release more information, which that's what I want.
And Aunt Clara, I got to show this. Hello, I'm from Australia. You know I want to go there.
Yeah, she wants to go there.
Love seeing you all working together. Thanks for joining from Australia.
Yes, I try to work with and be on as many panels. Anyone that asks me, I go on their panels. I try to work with all the other creators out there. I've been very fortunate and well blessed so far, and look forward to continuing working with anyone and everyone.
And Bible Group, my favorite crime channel.
Thank you, sir.
You. All right, my King of Kings. I always wondered if LE have since placed cameras in the area the crime took place. Many of these creeps like to go back to the scene.
I saw a reference that he made, and I just didn't include it in this slide, where they went and bought a lot of different electronic devices. And he made a reference in that about people that may come back to the scene. So it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't do that exact thing and did stakeouts and other things, because even with the Atlanta child murders, that's how he was caught, was not returning to a crime scene, but dumping a body into a river that eventually a body was recovered from. And it's due to that stakeout and due to the behavioral science unit that said that this is what's going to evolve, and this is where the killer will act next, or this is something, mannerisms that this killer would do. And it would be the same with Delphi, that whatever the behavioral science units decided that this type of killer would do, that if they said that he would return, then you most certainly can say that they put up necessary stakeouts or cameras to try to entrap him.
All right. Shane, I've also said no online involvement, but he wanted to say more.
Possible, like I said, now, if you have any other videos of him going into certain details, like I said, I probably spent 7 or 8 hours looking at different videos. I didn't find them all, I'm sure, but most of them either were taken from other creators and it was just rehashed. But there was at least 3 really good independent interviews that I was able to see.
All right. And my King of Kings followed up. I know it wouldn't be proof of anything, but it could give LE a person of interest to look into.
That's right.
And obviously they need one, right?
Yeah, they do.
Dave, I am just not sold on the KKTK idea. They were the murderers. They were the murderers.
And it doesn't appear that he is either, because Ives says it at no point that was he ever looking at that it was a certain person. So Dave, you and Mr. Ives, y'all agree on that? He didn't think that they were the persons to be charged either. Now that doesn't mean that new evidence hasn't been developed since he left. And in another part of the interviews I didn't include in this, he makes that statement that, you know, that he hopes that at the time he was involved in it, they didn't have a personal interest, but he hopes that has changed and they now have one.
All right. And here's one of your first collaborators from Marvin Frank. Hey, Marv. Hey. Glad you're with us.
Y'all check them out. They're a great channel. They helped me so much, and they were, you know, got me started on this and brought my interest to it. Them and Randy, and they always been good and very respectful to me. And actually last week we had a private meeting online for over an hour, so I still talk with them about certain facts of the case, and look forward to working with them in the future.
All right, and come on, Google machine. All right, and Cindy Smith, they're creeps, but unsure if they were the killers. I'm sure that's Kate.
But they need to deserve. They deserve to serve all the time they can.
Sean says, I've said there were signatures and non-secular things at the crime scene. Could this be a religious motivated crime?
That will be determined when we, and if they find the killer, for the fact that psychopaths have a lot of fantasies. And if this is a certain type of psychopath and he's a serial offender, he's feeding on that, and he's living on those memories and everything. And if it's a religious aspect, then, we don't know. I mean, it most certainly could be. I have no idea.
All right, Shane, crime of opportunity, but not random. IMO.
Yeah.
That's true.
And you, and that's what I'm saying is that, when you say semi-random, that's is that what he's meaning? That's as good as guess as any. And I'd rather he'd have put it in the words that you put it in. I would have understood it a little bit better.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, Mrs. Thang, 65. Were these statements made before the KK and Shots profile were revealed?
Some of the interviews, I believe, were later, but some of the interviews probably were before too, because if I ain't mistaken, Ives left after about 11 months. And so it could have been at 11 months. But now we have to look at that the Anthony Shots search warrant was issued early on. I mean, it wasn't something that was unknown. Now, the interview process 2 years later that was released through murder sheets is one thing. But Ives says that he produced the search warrants and the subpoenas. And so he would have known about that part of it. And so he would have had certain information about the investigative part of that, or that's my judgment of it. Doesn't mean it's true, but regardless of the interviews, and like I said, they something may have jumped up at him and slapped him in the face and said, "Oh, we got to pay more attention to the clients," or not. I don't know, but like I said, the initial search warrant was issued just within weeks of the murders.
All right. And Molly, at Steve, were Ives' statements regarding unplanned murders prior to Ellie linking the Shots account? Not sure when Ellie. Oh, that's what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
My bad.
And this question and the last question, exact same thing. That he would have known about the Anthony Shots because they was trying to figure out who Anthony Shots was, and so he had information. Don't know how much of the forensics was done after he left and continues on. And I'm sure they're still continuing looking into the Anthony Shots stuff because, there's the internet and the technologies and the algorithms out there searching for information are better every day.
All right. And Cindy, and it's surprising how many CSAM creeps are to be found in such a small town. You said that right.
And it's shocking every time that you find one, it's a school teacher or it's a Boy Scout leader or it's a preacher. They're across the board, law enforcement officers. I served with, I worked with some officers that I would have never thought that were a molester of children and stuff. And they're serving time, rightly so. They should be.
All right. Sally, I find it very unusual. There are no females on the force, and the one I knew of in Florida was killed in a house fire, supposedly caused by lightning.
Yes, and we just talked about that the other day, and I saw where there was a couple of creators looking at that, and it is very interesting. And I know that the FBI agent that worked some of it early on. And was part of the search warrant, Ron Logan's. I don't know if she was consistently involved throughout the case or not.
All right. And Carrie Ann, why did Ives give a lot of info in this interview when they have been so careful to be tight-lipped?
Well, like I said, with this interview, I don't know how much of it that he let out, and I think it was very valuable. I think it's some great information. It told some steps they took, and and I'm glad of what I know now about the case. Makes me feel a little bit better about, especially the cell tower. For whatever reason, I had missed that information of how they filtered that. But when I saw this, um, and he's on board with me as far as wanting more information released. He thinks, from that one statement, and whenever that statement, I didn't look at the exact date that statement was made, but that law enforcement should release information, and I agree with it.
All right, Indian paintbrush. Could it just be that it's such a small town that any tragedy would be on the mind of local officials and connected only due to proximity?
It could. I mean, but we had a lot of people, law enforcement wasn't local. You had these people coming from all over the country. The behavioral science unit, they wouldn't be involved in that. The FBI that came from Minneapolis and the resources brought in, the agencies that were brought in from outside that assisted in whatever manners they assisted. So, you're working with a group of individuals, a think tank of all these investigators. So I really, it could be that it's just a local proximity thing, but there was a lot of people that weren't local that was working on this case.
All right, Carrie Ann, and he has been reinstated. Is he on the case again?
I don't know. I most certainly would be asking that. I may even get with, I've got to figure it out and look at that.
All right. And my King of Kings, this evil creep seems like the type who would go back to the scene to relive it because of the posing and souvenirs.
Absolutely. And with modern technology, did he do that with cameras? Did he take pictures? Or does he revisit? Don't know. But that's something most certainly law enforcement would be looking at.
All right, and digital. So evidence of Libby's connections to Anthony Schott's account was either removed from both phones or undiscovered until after Ives resigned.
No, I don't know. That's not what I was saying or implying. I don't know if you saw something in a different interview. I was saying that Ives would have known about the Anthony Schott's information for the fact that there was early on a search warrant made of the Kleins. Now, more evidence could have been discovered after he left the case, but no, if that comments is that I was implying that all that had been removed, no, that's not what I was saying.
All right, and Alicia, Barbara McDonald said something that always made me wonder. If the killer knew girls would be there, but perhaps not Abby and Libby. She said he talked to another young lady, but she was able to go in another direction.
Yeah, there's a contact made, I think it was by a 16-year-old at the other end of the trail a few minutes prior or sometime prior to when Abby and Libby started the video. I take it that's where you're referencing that he.
Yeah, she finished up by saying, we know some of Libby's friends were also talking to Anthony Schott.
Oh, okay.
So that's what it was. All right. And then Marvin Frank, they knew about KK because his house was searched shortly after the murders.
And that's what I was speaking to
that's
digital.
Where you were going with.
And that, if Ives played a part in all the search warrants, and he would have known about the Keegan Klein, and knowing about Keegan Klein and Anthony Schott's connection is why he would have issued those search warrants.
All right. And Olivia, Ives had a definite POI in mind. You think?
It's possible. I don't know. I mean, he said, he was very guarded with that, if he is thinking of that, I have no idea who that person of interest is, but I most certainly would ask him that.
All right. Let's see here. Alicia put Carrie in. He was sworn in again in April of 2019. Okay. So we'll have to see if he's still there. Marv said they knew about Anthony Schott's profile right away.
Yes.
Aunt Clara, does anyone know if Eric Alter is related to Ron Logan?
I have no idea.
Okay. Let's see here. Cindy Smith says, 2 things I can't get out of my head. I got to go find what she was saying. Okay, here we go. Number 1, they told community there was no cause to worry right after.
Yes, I saw that. And I have no idea what that means. I mean, you got 2 children killed, and why in the world would you tell her, don't worry?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely crazy. Okay. And number 2 for Cindy, someone knows that voice, even with the audio quality, not ideal.
I believe you're absolutely correct. And we're working on a project now with some professionals that hopefully whenever we present that, that may answer the questions of why someone's not stepping forward.
Yep. Dave, I am starting to be convinced this was a random crime.
I'm again, if you look totally at this and take his word only, then you would. Absolutely, Dave. I'd agree with you.
All right, Cindy, I know he sounds like generic Midwestern accent white guy, but voices are distinct.
And the FBI will have got the proper professionals that will be able to analyze his voice patterns and how he used certain words and whatever his cadence is. There's a lot of information to be gathered from that.
All right. And Olivia too says revenge murders.
Can't argue that couldn't be, because he says there's more to it than just a simple murder.
Levi Ridge says Ellie hasn't contacted those giving tips in several years. Don't know about that.
Hopefully they will reach out again and generate and give some more information so that start showing the community that we're interested in helping and working with you.
All right, my King of Kings. I think it is someone who knows KK. He was probably sharing his images with other sickos online, leading BG to the girls.
That's another possibility.
That is a possibility.
Yep.
We've actually talked about
just like the revenge killings. I mean, both of them are viable possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Dave said, I heard they have 11 markers.
And that's with current technologies. As it gets better, they may have more and more markers and be able to do something with it.
All right. And then Marvin Frank, think of it this way. If drugs and revenge is motive, MCs are going to be involved as they get the drugs to the area and distribute to sellers.
There's all different types of possibilities. It's just it's the child angle of it. That is odd in and of itself.
All right. And Molly, police also told the community not to worry anymore about 10 days after the Texas escaped prisoner. Then they found 4 people killed in their vacation home. They weren't going to go there until LE said safe.
And sadly, once again, sometimes law enforcement makes statements that they shouldn't make, and it causes harm and death and tragedies in the community, and it's sad.
My King of Kings, KK is a connecting factor between the girls and BG.
It's most certainly a possibility.
All right, let's see here. Olivia, according to Ellie's KK transcripts, there was a definite connection between KK and LG.
Yes, it most certainly was in there, and it was asked about pointedly by the investigators.
Mm. All right, King of Kings. I wonder if the AS account was a common account used by other creeps looking for young girls?
You know, Keegan made money, and he wouldn't turn money down for if he's selling links and Dropbox access, and so he did that. And he had other accounts also, just not this one, but he had other accounts that he created. So this was a method of how he made money, and so there's a lot of individuals across this country that are put at danger by this Klein guy, who's absolutely the scum of the earth.
All right. And Levi, I've heard that the evidence that was collected was misplaced and lost by Ellie.
I have no idea about that.
Dave, Ellie told KK they didn't think he did it.
And, is that a ploy or not? I can tell you in law enforcement, sometimes you give them an out. And was that an out for him? I don't know. But sometimes you give them that we don't think you did it, but you know who, or just to get them started talking. Like I say, that's just, some tactics that's used sometimes by law enforcement. And we just don't know what the behavioral science unit told them to do during that interview and how to ask certain questions.
All right. And Marvin Frank, KK's phone could have been cloned so others could use the AS profile.
Absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of technologies out there that had access by certain individuals that could have done a lot of different things.
All right. And Cindy Smith, since dude in the AS photos was a model, so his pics would be easily available to other catfishers.
Absolutely.
Oh, there goes the Google machine.
Uh-oh.
Hold on. Okay. Molly, Ives' crime scene is unquestionably compromised. Interesting statement. Any opinion, Steve? Something beyond searchers, if you can say.
He says it's contaminated, and in the search warrant they did mention they did some searches for some cleaning agents or cleaners. There was a certain part of that search warrant about that there may have been something else that happened at that crime scene. And if that is the case, then Molly, that is a very good point. That could have been something far more sinister, far more well planned. And if you get into that type of killer that plans in that manner, then we're most certainly talking about a very a higher IQ criminal, organized criminal than you normally deal with in this type of murder.
JP would have had ability to clone phones, in my opinion. Didn't he work on the lines phones through his business?
He did. The only reason I'm allowing, most times I don't want any initials or names in the chat and stuff. But JP, he asked for it. He says, I want people to question me.
Yeah.
And so anytime anybody wants attention, and JP went in and he took and introduced himself into the investigation. And regardless if he's involved or not, he took valuable time away from investigators by creating an atmosphere of, look at me, I want your attention. And for that type of personality, I have absolutely no use for.
All right, Shane, one piece of physical evidence was a cigarette butt in the water. We heard that on the LE audio, 24 to 48 hours old.
And that's true, but being on a trail and or being in the area of a trail and being in an area of fishermen on a creek that could have been, washed down from who knows? Could it have been the killer? Absolutely. Could it have been someone else's? Absolutely. But if they ever did develop a DNA profile on that, then of course that person that they're focusing on would have to prove one or two things.
All right. My Google machine, my comments are catching up. So if I overlook y'all, I apologize. My King of Kings, do you guys think they were planning on meeting someone that day, or that this guy was watching their movements online from the AS account and followed them there?
During the interview from the murder sheets, there most certainly is mentions that 8 o'clock or sometime early that morning that there was some type of possibility of a meeting being set up. And then there's rumors about that what happened. I was supposed to meet them and they didn't show up. And the investigators make, some direct some questions towards that, getting an Amber Alert. But they most certainly introduced the fact that is something that they have to consider, that possibly something did occur.
All right. And Cindy, crime scene being a public park, many people go through there.
Most certainly, it was a high-risk crime. There's no doubt. But Ted Bundy did the same thing. He was, it didn't matter. Is that part of his fantasy? Was that part of this offender's fantasy? If it is, then of course he's going to take these risks and play them through.
And Dave, it seems to me that the demeanor and the calmness of the audio, this guy's a killer, doesn't value human life and has killed before and will kill again.
I absolutely agree 100% with you, sir.
Yep, I do too. Let's see here. Digital. There are also four-wheeler tracks behind the investigator looking at the foot tracks on the creek bank.
And, but we don't know in what context those occurred. Is that when they was bringing evidence, or not bringing evidence, but bringing equipment down to the scene for processing? Was it something that they were using in the creek to search? Was it sonar? I don't know what type of instruments were transported down there. I don't know if it was some of the 3D scanners. There's a lot of equipment that sometimes when you're going, and I've had to use them myself, when you're going to especially isolated park trails, that you can't get a vehicle there other than some of the four-wheelers or some of the side-by-sides, and you pack it full of whatever equipment you can and get it in there as best you can. And I don't know if that's part of that or if it was something else that someone in the past, or how old those tracks were. Don't know.
And Cindy Smith, whether it was a crime of opportunity or meticulously planned or somewhere in between, he evidently knew what to do and how to go about it.
He was most certainly, you're absolutely correct. He is a killer.
I think he'd done it before. Okay. Melissa, I think it's linked to our murders, Evansdale.
There's absolutely a possibility.
Dave, this guy's probably a perfectionist or a person who is very controlling in everything he does.
That is part of of a psychopath's mentality. That everything's about them, and it has nothing to do with anyone else.
That's you. That's not me.
Yeah.
He can't blame me for that one. That's him.
That's me.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Hold on.
Uh-oh. Are you ready? No?
I'm trying to pull up the Amber Alert.
All right. Right there.
Anybody around Lithonia, Georgia, we got a license plate CDI 2646 Malibu blue 2015 Chevrolet. So if you see that vehicle, notify law enforcement.
All right. And Levi, I could see Libby kicking at the killer while he was trying to get the girls into his car, which was parked on private drive. That's how she lost her shoe.
Don't know everything that was at the crime scene, but, is it plausible? I mean, until they release all the information, we won't know.
All right. And Dave, he may look normal at first glance, but if you pay attention to his mannerisms, he will reveal his mentality.
Absolutely. And even speaking to him, you'll see certain trends. His family knows it. Anyone he's living with knows it. They've seen his mannerisms. They know that he's most certainly narcissistic, psychopath, sociopath. If you go by me, he's psychopath. If you go by Ives, he's a sociopath.
And look at here. The Bible group, only 22 more likes to reach the big 1,000.
Oh, you're on subs.
Yes.
Yes. 22. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, let's see here. Olivia, Ives absolutely took the case personally.
And I have to admire the man for that.
Yes. Yes. Let's see here. Corgi Mama, I've always thought serial killer. Me too.
I'm
You don't.
like I said, well, no. I mean, regardless if this is a budding serial killer or someone that has done it before, somewhere, someone to do this to two little children, and I mean, it's not an accident. This is a man that brought everything that day to commit these crimes and committed them, and most certainly, persons of that mentality. They're just, there's a reason he did this. And so I would never take him out of being able to do this again.
Mm-hmm. Shane, I've had a gut feeling since very early on the item left at the scene was from the graveyard. The religious connection never has gone away.
But very possible. It could be. I mean, you're only looking at a few hundred feet or even if that far from the cemetery.
All right. And Sally, possibly going there to commit crime, victims unplanned?
Could be. And that's the semi-random part. And like I said, he just chose semi-random, but both descriptions between you and the other viewer in chat, y'all's explanation is far clearer than what the semi-random was.
Semi-random. Olivia, so you think you can believe everything KG said?
No. That man is a manipulator, and anyone that believes what that man says, I mean, his whole life is based upon lies. His whole profile is based upon lies. For what purpose? To get pictures of little children nude. And I'd like to talk to him, but it'd be exciting.
All right. And Dave, I have thought that the signature or non-secular stuff might be related to Oracle Delphi Greek mythology.
And there's been a lot of references made to that, and a lot of people thought process on that they agree with you. I don't know. I wish I could see the pictures of the scene. I'm going to try to get there to the scene and look at it. Although other than just area is all I would ever be able to get from it. But most certainly I would love to see the film, the 3D imaging, the photographs, whatever they have on that crime scene. I most certainly would love to look at.
Molly quotes, more to it than simply killed, end quote. Very powerful, intriguing statement.
Like I said, that was one of the most complexing and attention-getting statements that he made through all his interviews. That carried great weight with me.
All right, and Shane, semi-random equals whichever shots it was, knowing that there were that many kids at the trails that day. He had his pick, so to speak.
Could be.
Ick.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. Molly at Steve. Anything beyond your presentation that I've said that seemed, quotes, pointed or trying to give a hint?
Not at what I've, of everything I've seen, I picked out the most interesting ones to me. And that's how several hours. But, and I know there's probably other interviews out there. And like I say, I'm going to try to make contact with him and see if he'll speak with me. Because like I said, in one of his interviews, he did say that he felt it part of his duty to bring attention to this case. And he knows, as a lot of law enforcement now is using the web sleuth community because we are, I mean, you're looking at thousands of eyes and people out there that have one purpose in mind, and that's putting animals and predators like this off the street. And hopefully as our relationship builds between law enforcement and the web sleuth community, that we can have an impact. And hopefully he'll choose to go that route like many others are.
All right. And Levi, I'm thinking that the girls were made unconscious during a struggle on the private drive and killer dragged them to the other side of the creek where they were killed.
You know,
One
if
person.
both of them were the size of Abby, I really couldn't argue with you. But in SWAT, firemen, all the different types of training, even handling a 150 or 170 pound drag dummy is extremely difficult. And that's on parking lots and driveways. Going through a wooded terrain and up and down embankments. Not saying he couldn't do it, but I would be extremely surprised if this man could handle, as it's been explained to me, that Libby was close to 200 pounds. That would take an incredibly strong man to be able to do that over any distance within that time frame, because we're only talking about a time frame of 45 minutes, well under an hour.
All right. And Marvin Frank, I think KG has done the best she can. You have to remember the trauma she was under. Not everything she said is perfect. Plus, she remembers things as time goes by.
Sure, yeah, exactly so. I mean, you know, the stresses of what's going on with her family, and even now with people pointing fingers and making accusations and things, we just have to think and put them, you know, that they lost something that they can never replace. And so we have to understand that.
From Dave, Steve, do you think Ellie had different views of how to investigate the crime?
Absolutely. Been there. And, you know, there's great debates, you know, and I've seen investigations messed up and I've argued one way or the other. Hopefully I was always on what I think. Well, I know I was always on what I thought was the right way to do it, because I wouldn't argue that for something that I ever figured would be wrong. But but you do see that there is open discussion, and generally it's left up that when you have two sides, that it's whatever the senior officials finally decide that, well, this is the way we're going to go with it. And if that strategy doesn't work out, then if you were on the other side, then hopefully they'll give you a chance to try your strategy. And it doesn't appear that's been the case so far.
All right. Teresa, Steve, he said one or more signatures may pop up again. Did he mean if BG kills again or something else?
I took it as meaning BG kills again, because those signatures, if it's his signature, it can only come from him. Now, you may have similar signatures, but that ain't what he said. He said that he thinks one or two of these signatures could pop up again.
Olivia, too, confirmed. It would be beyond difficult to drag an unconscious 200-pound person up that area. Yes, it would be.
Yes.
All right, let's see here.
I never worked with a 200-pound dummy. The heaviest dummy I think we ever handled was like 170, and we had to drag it something like 40 yards and within a certain time. And I watched a lot of men that couldn't do it. It's extremely difficult.
All right. And Lisa said that is exactly what Kaylee Anthony, crime scene investigator, said was her procedure. And that was your not talking to your other folks or whatever on the crime scene. All right. Let's see here.
We're getting pretty close.
Very difficult. Yes, you are. Let's see here. Corgi Mama. Ives seems very genuine. He is respectful of not overstepping of his boundaries. He isn't in the position to answer things Ellie doesn't want said.
That's correct. And but he is a professional, and I appreciate what he has said and what information he has relayed.
All right. And from Alicia, in an early video clip from the news, they said police are doing undercover work at the cemetery.
Um, like I said, he did relay that they were doing some other investigations, and I don't know exactly. I hadn't seen that part of it, but if you have a link or something, send it to me. I'd like to look at it.
All right. And Elaine James, do you think the killer was at the trails days before scoping out locations?
With modern technology, most certainly he could have. And that's where it would have been important to go back and look at other suspicious person calls or incidents of someone being in the area doing some other type of crime, or someone just having a bad feeling about being stalked. And they would have done that profiling of past cases and everything. They would have looked at the demographics of the area and what crimes were going on in the vicinity. And see if there's anything similar, or anyone describing somebody, and even the vehicles that were parked there. So they would have done some investigations of that.
All right. And Corgi Mama, I think if motive was revenge, it would have been a lead/connection that would have come to light, have been solved by now.
Very possible. I mean, if you have a motive, and they would have looked at the revenge motives, and they would have tried to investigate and followed out. You're absolutely correct.
What do you think of GKK?
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that?
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Yeah, he's in jail for.
Oh, okay. Jim Cook, what do you think of GKK and Open Secrets videos?
Those are some interesting videos. Garrett Kirk's is most certainly an interesting individual. He's killed twice in that vicinity, or from that community, and he's in that community and the surrounding areas. And he most certainly is an animal and a killer. And but those are interesting interviews. Okay, well, it's getting close here.
All right, so you got just a couple more. You
All
want
right,
to keep
yep,
going? All right.
We'll take 3 more if we got them.
All right, SB 74. The statement that there was really no good leads explains a lot.
Yeah, he talks about that there was a lot of leads, but they were just not really any really good leads.
Mm-hmm. And Frank Meister's in the house.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Frank.
Let's see here. Where's the other? JW28. I still can't get over how bold of a crime it was. Kids had no school, middle of the day, 2 girls. It's unreal.
Yes, single offender, if it is a single offender, and there's, FBI looks at single offenders as taking 2 is a very, very rare case. It does occur, but it's rare. And so that's the argument for a lot of people making that it's more than 1 offender. So, the ball's up in the air on that.
We've had, let's see here. Molly wants to know if Ives is still working. We're going to have to verify that. It looks like, let's see here.
Right. Okay. All
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Wait, one thing here. Teresita just popped in here. Ellie's silence hasn't worked so far. Time to do something different and release more info. Yes.
I can't agree more with anyone. But anyway, guys, I don't want to get into anyone else's. We got another show coming up. It's Crime and Shame. They've got a important show coming up tonight, thanking one of their mods. And
thank you. You have reached a new level on watchers.
Well, we did. Oh, excellent.
Yes. So thank you to everybody and for your chat.
And share this information with everybody you can, guys, because we won't have an impact. The bigger our footprint is, the more impact we can have and bring focus this case and try to solve and give justice to his family.
Cyclops update.
And I want to thank all my guys that's working on Cyclops on the our mapping system. I've got some more information that we're going to start putting and creating some maps this week. Hopefully we'll get some information out there next week and getting everything done. But y'all go check out Crime and Shame tonight. And y'all have a great night. We want to thank you, and Marv and Frank, and all the other creators out there. We want to thank y'all tonight. And y'all have a great night.
Bye, y'all.